Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be deep diving into how I built and launched a brand new app purely through the use of AI tooling. No engineers or designers involved. Just me on the tools, getting this into the hands of users in a matter of days. I'm going to be taking you through the exact technology stack and tools that I used, the steps that I followed, and how I was able to achieve the results that I did. The app that I've developed was based around a pain point that I've experienced, and that's for parents around finding new and interesting activities to do with their kids. Now, there's a whole bunch of parenting sites out there that have a lot of great content on these activities, but the thing that was missing for me was being able to see it on a map and have an idea across the city where in vicinity to me there are activities, where I might need to travel. And so the map to me is a really key part of being able to work out which activities to take my kids to. That's what I started with, the pain point there when I'd experienced myself, and I think that's a great basis for building an app. All right, so let's start out with having a look at the app, Tiny Adventures. So what you can see here obviously is the map at the core of it. We've already got a whole bunch of activities being displayed and a list of what's on the map listed down the left-hand side. This obviously renders on a mobile, so be sure to load that up on your phone if you'd like to have a look at that. And we've got the ability to filter by different activity types. At the moment, they're all selected, so we clear those. And for example, let's say I wanted to go and find playgrounds, and I wanted to find epic-sized playgrounds, so ones that are really worth traveling to. Then I can apply those filters. There's also an age range filter here as well. And then parents can click on one. So we've got one here, Tumbalong Park Playground in Darling Harbour in Sydney, which is a huge playground with a great water play area. And so we've got a little description there, and the user can click on that to jump to an article that explains it. And they can also jump into Google Maps to see the place there and be able to navigate to there and see the ratings, reviews, and photos. I've been careful not to duplicate too much of the Google Maps functionality for the MVP. You can submit locations as well, and then that goes into a queue in the back end that I review and curate. And so yeah, there's a back end interface I've built as well. So how did I build this all? Let's jump in and start from the beginning. First step is the ideation stage. So I used a custom GPT to do this. If you're not familiar with custom GPT, it's part of the ChatGPT Plus subscription. It's a fantastic feature. I use it all the time across my business. And what you can do is give it a set of custom instructions, some documents for its knowledge base, and it's essentially like a modified version of ChatGPT for a more specific purpose. So this one I've called my planning and development assistant for Tiny Adventures. I've got some context and instructions in there. And then I've got some documents that I've uploaded. I've uploaded a number of best practice documents for around the use of Claude code, the use of Bolt, which is the actual platform I use to build out the app, Figma Make that I use for designs. You can access these best practice documents from each of those different platforms' help centers. And this is really useful because I'm going to be asking this assistant to generate the prompts for Figma Make and for Bolt for me. So going back to some of my early interactions with this assistant, I started out just by talking about the general concept that I had in mind and bouncing ideas around with the assistant around what would be the minimum viable product type functionality that I would need and how I might source the data from Google Maps, and just a lot of setting the scene and planning pieces, who the target customer could be. This is a really useful step for refining the idea before you really start to try and build it out. It's a great starting point, and actually the next step that I moved to after this was working on the branding. So I also had some conversations with the assistant around what kind of names would work for the app and how I might position it and what kind of branding I might have. And I took the output of that and I fed it into Gemini. So I actually bounce around the different LLMs quite a bit. I also use Claude for data tasks, so I'm just leaning on them based on their strengths. Gemini's Nano Banana is a fantastic image generation model, and so I knew that would be pretty good for designing the logo and branding for the app. So I jumped across into Gemini, and if we go back to the start of this conversation, you'll see that I was asking it to design a logo and app icon. The branding piece is really important to do before you get into the design phase. The branding will inform the design. That's why I did this very early on. And so bouncing around with Gemini, it came up with some good suggestions on color schemes and logos, and then it started giving me some concepts. Very similar to sitting down with a designer and giving them a brief, which is something I just really love about this tooling is how well it replicates those kind of interactions. Gemini gave me these concepts. This was quite cool that it brought it to life as how it would look on an iPhone, and some other things like the splash screen. I didn't love that first concept. I then got it to come up with this second one that called Winding Path, which I quite liked and I ended up running with. You'll see it was called Adventures with Kids back at this stage. I later realized that name was too long and got truncated when it was saved onto the iPhone screen, so I had to subsequently change. On an iPhone, generally you can fit a name that's around 11 to 14 characters. Tiny Adventures is 14 characters, so it's on the upper range of that. But yeah, that's important to keep in mind because it was getting truncated to just Adventures, which was not going to help people to find out. And then we've got a great little splash screen concept there. That was fantastic. I took that from Gemini and I got it to develop more the branding ideas. And then what I did next, I took it over to Figma Make. And I think Figma Make's a relatively new tool. It allows you to use plain language to request it to put together different designs for you. I subscribe to this. I should call out some of the costs. Most of these tools are around $20 US a month. ChatGPT Plus, Figma Make, so really not a lot of money. Bolt was a little bit more expensive, so I'll talk through that shortly. But Figma Make I subscribed to, and I started giving it the brief out of Gemini on the branding, and I asked it to put together a design system. If you're not familiar with visual design for apps, design systems are quite important for defining how different components that get repeated across an app should look, and it sets the foundations for the visual design of the app. If we jump across to what Figma Make does develop for me here, you can see it's very similar to ChatGPT. You're having conversations and iterating and getting it to make changes as you go. This is what it came up with for the design system. The icons for each activity and the color schemes were pretty important to define early on before I started designing the interface. The fonts, the different sizes of fonts, the different buttons, what they should look like, the filter chips that are used extensively. I did ask it to do ratings. I decided subsequently not to include that because I'll just be duplicating Google Maps functionality. And yeah, the map pins for how they appear, obviously. Card skeletons are important when the app's loading. This is what the app should display, and it just gives the user a sense of activity happening while they're waiting for the content to load. So I took all that, and the next thing I did was then I started working on building out the actual front end. I have another Figma Make project on that one. You'll see it looks a little different to what I ended up building, which is fine, but it was generally in the right direction. And so on the right-hand side, you can see here where the map would appear. Figma Make won't include a design for a map. It's just unnecessary because that's just something that comes from Google Maps. So what I'm concerned about is the designs of what I'm layering on top. Now these are really interactive, so I can click on a map marker and I can load up the location details and what that needs to look like. I can also do some filtering, so I'll just close that. I'll go back to the activity type. You can see the different filter chips here, and you can play around with these. So this is fantastic if you want to put this in front of users before you actually start building. And that's where I got to on that front end. I also got it to design the backend admin screens for me. In the interest of time, I won't cover them here, but that was really useful as well. The next step, of course, is actually building the app in Bolt. Now, again, I went back to my custom GPT and had a conversation with it there around here are the designs. This helped me to put the prompts together. Figma Make doesn't currently allow you to export the designs as Figma files. Figma is, of course, it's an industry standard for visual design for apps. Surprisingly, they don't have the ability to export it as a Figma file. But that's not necessarily a problem actually, because the best practices with Bolt is generally to give it static visual designs. The Figma files can end up being very complex with all the layers. So I ended up taking a whole bunch of screenshots of the designs from Figma Make, both for desktop and for mobile. So you can toggle between desktop and mobile view. And I took a bunch of those screenshots. And then I fed that into my custom GPT and I said, help me to come up with the prompt to build this. Now, it's interesting because you could try and just build everything in one shot with Figma Make, and I did actually do that on the first attempt. I tried that. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think you really want to do it in a more iterative way. getting Bolt to build the initial maps-based screen first with just the bare bones functionality, and then layering on top of that is really important, because you can just get things right before you move on to the next one, just like you generally would with a product being built out like this with engineers. The other thing I'll call out as well at that stage was you also want to work with your custom GPT to work out what the right technology stack is for your application. For me, it was really important that I could build this as a native iOS and Android app afterwards off a single code base. So I chatted with ChatGPT and it came up with some suggestions on what tech stack would enable that. And so that's built in at the beginning. So it is pretty important for those kind of decisions. You bake that in right at the beginning. The database schema as well, you wouldn't take a close look at that. I ended up having to update the database schema. It was overly simplistic, what Bolt first built. I've got an engineering background, so that certainly helped to identify the right patterns there, and that's where you might need to bring in some technical expertise if you're not technical at all. But pay attention to those foundational pieces, because they can use up a lot of tokens trying to fix those up later. Jumping over to Bolt, just to explain a little bit more about that platform. It's a low-code, vibe coding type platform. I found it to be absolutely brilliant. I've tried others like Lovable. Lovable to me was messy because you had to deal with deploying the backend database and a lot of hosting setup, and Bolt just does all that for you. It's brilliant on that side of things. And the other thing that you need to know about is on the pricing side. I signed up for a pro account. I initially started with 10 million tokens. That wasn't enough for this app. I think I probably used somewhere in the vicinity of 15 to 20 million tokens to get to where the product is now. Like for $50 to get enough tokens to build an app like this, that is a pretty good deal. So compared to paying an engineer, that feels like money very well spent. But yeah, the commodity you're dealing with here is tokens, and so you do want to be careful about not churning through them too much. And there's a few tricks that you can do along the way. And a lot of it's to do with just paying close attention to what Bolt's doing, because it can get stuck in a bit of a loop. It only happened to me a couple of times, and I could see it just going over the same territory and using up a lot of tokens. And that required me to just have a closer look at what it was doing and give it a suggestion to get itself out of that. With a lot of these tools, you just can't blindly use the tooling. So keep that in mind. Now, with this app, I definitely wanted to use Google Maps right from the beginning. I'm a little bit biased because I used to work on Google Maps in my 2 years as a product manager with Google. As far as I'm concerned, it's the market leader for Maps experiences. So I didn't want to compromise on the user experience, even though there's costs involved with using Google Maps. I did need to go into my Google Cloud console, and I needed to enable the Maps JavaScript API and also the Places API and set up keys that could then be used by the app to use those endpoints. So again, gets a little bit on the technical side here. If this is new territory to you, you can use ChatGPT to navigate you through a lot of this. It definitely helped that I've worked with APIs and API keys previously. So set that up in the console. And now we'll jump across to Bolt. This is where the bulk of the activity took place. And you can see again, the conversational interface on the left-hand side. It's a lot like sitting with a really good engineer and just iterating through things, and just super powerful in that way, because as you think of things, you can just come back in and make them happen very quickly. You can see here it's warning me that I'm down to my last 2 million tokens. So that's out of my 25 million that I use. So yeah, that can, the stress levels can lift a little bit as you see yourself going through the tokens, but really the cost is pretty minimal in the big scheme of things. And we've got the preview of the app that it's built out. You can toggle between the mobile and desktop views. You can jump in and access your database here. It uses Supabase in the back end. Generally, there's not going to be a huge need for you to jump in and pay too much attention to that unless you're looking to really load data in, which was important for this app. So I did spend some time going in and having a close look at the table structure and making some changes there, but Supabase has been excellent. You can jump in and run SQL queries really easily there and interrogate and load the database. And this allows you to publish your app, and it's live. It's just no mucking around in terms of hosting, no ongoing hosting costs that you have to incur. It's all built into your Bolt subscription, so it's really good value. I did connect the app to a custom domain, tinyadventures.au. That was, again, a little tricky, leaned on some of my engineering experience. I had to go into my domain host and I had to make some DNS entries. to link it up. And so again, you can get ChatGPT to walk you through that. My first attempt didn't work and it introduced a couple of days delay because of the way DNS entries work. But I worked that out and got it all linked up, and that worked pretty nicely. One actually important thing to call out is the plan mode. In the interest of optimizing your use of tokens, it's really good to first give your prompt and select the plan mode with Bolt. And what that will trigger is essentially like a conversation. Again, like with an engineer, if you're sitting down before you build it, you'll have a conversation with them, talk through what you want to be built. And then often they might come back and say, what about this? What about this? What about these edge cases? So that's what Bolt will do. And if you do that first and you answer those questions and get ahead of that, it can mean less rework subsequently. I'm generally a big fan of the plan feature, and I used it more and more as I went along with building the app. That's all the building side of things. And then the next thing was loading the data in. The data is a really core part of this product. I had my own already curated list of 200 activities that I've been building up. So I use that as a starting point. I ended up using Claude for this. I had heard that Claude is very strong on the data aggregation and transformation side of things. I was really impressed with it. Over in Claude, you can create what's called a project, which is Claude's equivalent to a custom GPT. And so you can give it custom instructions. And this is my data agent. And I gave it instructions on the specific attributes that I need to populate to be able to load in to my app. So I need the Google Places ID. I need the lat long. I need it to categorize the different activity types and age ranges and generate some notes, and also find a useful article link. Go out and have a look at different parenting websites or find the official website. So there's quite a bit in here. And this is now a really useful tool for me because as I come up with ideas on other locations, I can just give it to this agent. It will put it in the right format for me. And then I've built a interface to upload that data into the backend. So I can now do that in bulk. So that was fantastic. A really interesting thing about Claude was to retrieve the Google Places ID and the lat long, that requires hitting the Google Places API, which incurs a cost. Claude was able to do that for me. I tried it with ChatGPT and it didn't work because it wanted my Google Places key. But Claude did it itself. So I think Claude and Anthropic are picking up the bill on that, which must really add up. But that was a great little hack, and I'm going to continue to use that to build out my data. So loaded all the data in, got that all sorted. The final step before I wanted to send it live was to put in instrumentation, and specifically Google Analytics. So it's important for me when I launch the app that I have some visibility over how it's being used. This is pretty basic. This is going to tell me how many users, where, what pages. I'll be interested to also put in something that does like maybe a heat mapping of how users interact with the app. So I'll layer more of that in, but Google Analytics at absolute minimum. This is great. I've somehow ended up picking up 28 users over in the US, which is surprising. And then we were good to go live. And I've now given this to a couple of parenting groups that I'm part of as my initial kind of test audience, get some initial feedback from them, which has been great. And the amazing thing about this now is I can continue to iterate on this app without having to go back to an engineer or a designer. So that's super powerful that I can now do this in a really fast way. As soon as I think of things, I can put them in place. And yeah, I think this is going to be great for anybody that's got a product idea that they want to bring to the market. That is everything for my deep dive on how I built Tiny Adventures. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, I'd love it if you could subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be publishing more of these videos around how to build and launch apps using AI accelerated product development. That's what we specialize in at ProductEdge.AI. And if you have an idea that you'd like to bring to life, a new product idea, and you'd like to have some help in making that happen, reach out. We're absolutely happy to have a conversation. So thanks for that. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.